Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us on the energy and technology stage for what I know is going to be a really absorbing hour talking about digital challenges, but also e-waste as well. So digital technology has transformed the world around us. It's given us huge opportunities, huge potential. It can help solve some of the environmental crises that we're facing. It can help rebuild our economies, rebuild our industry. But at the same time, it's also a potential source of challenges. E-waste is the fastest growing waste stream around the world. And in the UK, we produce the second highest amount of electronic waste per capita anywhere in the world.
Can you hear me?
At the same time, we're really dependent on imports, whether that's imports of critical raw materials or whether it's imports of electronic products as well. And so we're missing out on a lot of economic and environmental opportunities to do something really different with our electronics sector. So this panel is going to discuss how digital solutions can help drive sustainability while addressing the e-waste crisis. So I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Keith James. I'm Head of Public Partnerships at RAP. We're a global charity trying to bring the circular economy to life, making sure that everyone can adopt circular living. And I'm also on the Government Circular Economy Task Force, developing a circular economy strategy for England. And on that, I'm part of the group that are looking at electrical and electronic items as well. So today is going to be really useful for me to hear from a whole range of experts, both on the panel and yourselves as well. So if I can just ask the panel in turn to introduce yourselves and your organisations.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Heath. Hi, everyone. I'm Adam. I'm here on behalf of HMD, that's Human Mobile Devices, and we're a mobile phone manufacturer. So we are smaller than a lot of the other players that you'll know well, the Samsungs and the Apples of this world. To give you a little bit of context, since the business was founded probably about 8 years ago, we've sold somewhere in the region of 450 million phones. That still only puts us at 1 or 2% share of the global market. So we are a smaller player, but we still have a massive responsibility for the amount of devices we put out into the market. And over the last 5 years or so, I'd say, we've really been trying to design our products to not only be more durable and last longer, but also to consider what comes next. So building repairability at an early stage in the design process so that the devices, when they do eventually come to the end of their first or second life, can then go on and be used in a better way in part of the circular supply chain. So that's me. Good to meet you all.
Afternoon, everyone. Rebecca Lewis-Borman. I look after service across Currys, and that essentially means that we're looking at optimising all of the services that we have in terms of our circular propositions, and we currently have the biggest repair centre across Europe, where we're managing hundreds of thousands of products, not just that are traded in and repaired and resold, but also just through recycling that comes in through each of our stores. So really keen to talk about all of the kind of the digital aspects of this and what we're going to be doing to improve our repair services across the UK.
Good afternoon. My name's Kenny McGee from Component Sense. We help billion-dollar electronic manufacturers to redistribute components they no longer need. So it's very much at the top of the market, very much upstream. When you're forecasting to build products, whether it's phones, laptops, or even industrial equipment, you're largely guessing how many you're going to need. And there's a natural process of which you accumulate excess and obsolete, and it's typically around 10% of revenue. So if you're a $100 billion company, you're going to have an awful lot of excess. It's brand new, it's unused, and it tends to just gather dust unless somebody like us gets involved. And our job is to make sure those components fulfill their destiny and actually have a life.
Hiya, my name's David Young. I'm an independent consultant on behalf of my own business, the Venue Tech Collective. I'm actually here today on behalf of my client, who's a charity, 5 years old, called Every Child Online, based in Essex. Short figures. We've repurposed about £7 million of a kit into 250 schools, working with 100 charities, and we're now working with social services. We are now embarking on our first venue partnership as a charity partner to XL to close the digital divide across the borough of Newham. And once we get that blueprint right, I've got a big PLC globally that wants to back me with eliminating digital waste and repurposing it around the UK.
Great, thank you all very much. So I've got a series of questions for the panel, and then I'll invite questions from the audience as well. But Kenny, perhaps if I can start with you. So you just gave us a little glimpse into the world of component sense, focusing on reducing waste before the products are even made. Can you say a bit more about the scale of the problem and opportunity with excess and obsolete parts?
Yeah, I mean, I came across it. I was working for one of the biggest component distributors around about the millennium, 99, 2000. There was a crazy peak in the market back then. I don't know if you're all old enough to remember the millennium bug. That produced an enormous amount of new electronics because everybody felt they had to replace every electronic item. And we were led to believe that was the case. The world didn't come to an end at the start of the millennium, but it did generate an enormous amount of electronic production. So I was working for them, and I was visiting my customers' factories, and I was just seeing piles and piles of what was clearly valuable stock. You know, if you're in the market and you know what you're looking at, you know the value that's in it. You know, a little block the size of a brick can be up to $50,000 worth of components. You know, so I was seeing this stuff in the corner. It was a telecoms company building for BT. And it was clearly discarded. You know, I mean, a warehouse is typically very tidy. This stuff was just shoved in the corner. It turns out that was about $3.2 million worth. This was a fairly small Scottish company working predominantly for one customer. So it was an enormous amount of value. And their attitude towards it was, well, that's just excess, you know. And I said, well, what are you going to do with it? So, well, nothing we can do with it. So that's really where my mind got thinking that, you know, if this relatively small company is sitting on 3.2 million, how much is really out there? And that's when I made that initial calculation that 10% of revenue was tied up in excess stock, and I started to use that as a fact. Bearing in mind, I was a small business at the time, and it was fact certainly for that company. But as I've grown, and now we're talking to really massive companies, it's absolutely true. And holds true even at Apple scale, even at Samsung scale. And the stock still largely gathers dust until it's scrapped. And it's a terrible waste. The amount of resources that have gone into those devices, you know, in terms of elements, there's I think something like 2/3 of the periodic table is in the average mobile phone. So all those elements have been dragged out of the ground. The resources to do that are enormous. The damage to the environment's enormous. Then all the power that's taken to then turn those into electronic components is also enormous. So an enormous amount of waste if it just gathers dust and then gets scrapped. And again, even scrapping it while we're trying to reclaim gold and copper from the devices at the end, it's a tiny percentage of the value that's recovered. And it's also not a very nice process environmentally.
So what sort of opportunities are there then to do something better with that material?
Well, what we focus on is we take from billion-dollar companies mainly because the quality is guaranteed. So a billion-dollar company or a billion-dollar site will be buying direct from the chip maker typically. So we've got very clean line of sight in terms of the quality, and we typically then sell it downstream. So if you're Nokia in the old days, but you know, then there was a period with BlackBerry, and then Apple and Samsung, the prices they pay for chips would terrify most electronic manufacturers, and you know, they're typically about a quarter of the price. So what we do is we give them all their money back. We want to take away all the barriers. We give them at least all their money back, and then we sell it downstream. So we can take it from a billion-dollar company and sell it to a $100 million company or less, and they're saving money. So they could save maybe 30%, and we make a little margin in the middle, and some of that we use for good causes. So we're very passionate about the other side of the e-waste journey. You know, once we've finished with the products, what happens to them, and that's something we're working hard on now as well, is can we donate and help make that a cleaner process.
I can confirm from a manufacturing standpoint that is of, you know, massive interest, because, you know, you're right, the chipset itself is the vast majority of the cost of the actual device itself. And not only are you paying for the chip, you've got to pay for a license to actually use a certain tier of chip. So yeah, if there are ones that are going to waste, then that's going to be hugely of interest to a lot of the the manufacturers that are out there that are producing many devices, but are perhaps, you know, not the ones that are generating that excess in the first place because they may have misordered or overordered or for whatever is happening in the global supply chain at the moment. So yeah.
Thank you. And then once those components get into products, I know HMD have done a lot of work looking at how to make products more repairable or durable. Can you give us some insights into what's been successful for you?
Absolutely. I mean, where we began this journey was we represent Nokia devices as well as our own HMD brand. And one of the things that's always been fundamental as a Nokia phone, as you will probably all remember from back in the day, is durability, right? The indestructible bricks that can stand pretty much whatever the test of time throws at them. And it's how do we bring that into the slightly more delicate smartphone world, because they are obviously a lot more breakable and they've got big screens and all this kind of stuff. So we started doing research into what are the areas of componentry that fail the most. What is driving people buying a new device? Are they breaking it and then living with it, or breaking it and fixing it, or trading it in? And as it turns out, all of these things are actually increasing the rapidity with which someone upgrades to a new device, because in many places and in many instances it's still easier to just get a new phone or to upgrade your phone than it is to deal with the previous one. And so we started looking into the highest rates of failure and the things that drive that the most. Number one, as you would expect, well, who knows, can anyone guess what the number one most breakable element on a phone is? It's what you probably think it is. Screen, absolutely. That's it. Number one by a country mile. We've probably all broken a screen in our time, right? And then the number two component that sits behind that. Anyone want to hazard a guess at the number two behind the screen? Not necessarily breaking, but
I would say battery.
Battery, absolutely perfect. So, and that's the thing that actually drives the purchase of the new device. You've used your phone for maybe 2 years, 2.5, 3 years. The efficiency is starting to dip. You're getting less than a day out of it. Particularly if you've got something like an iPhone, which statistically half the people in the room here will have. They actually have quite small battery devices. Very small milliampere hour, and so you can really start to suffer over the long period of time. But there's nothing wrong with the device, and in fact it's a faff changing the device. If you can provide a really simple way of replacing that battery, you'll get easily another year, 2 years out of the life of a device. So it's sort of that second part in the circularity arc. So you've got the componentry bit up front, making sure you're reusing it correctly. Then how do you design for longevity and making sure they last longer, and then all the amazing stuff that comes later about getting the devices back and what happens to the metals and everything when it gets traded back in. So that second part of the arc is what we really focused on, and we've tried to build repairability into devices across our entire portfolio. We make phones from $10, I think, is the cheapest feature phone, old school brick phone that we still make, right the way up to $500 or euro smartphones. And the challenge has been, how do you build repair in for all of those different levels? Because it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. And so we've been able to make even $100, €100 smartphones repairable for screen and battery at home by a user with nothing more than a screwdriver and a pick. And we work with amazing partners like iFixit in order to provide guaranteed components, to the point around making sure you're working with really, really good quality components and that kind of thing. And we do that in all kinds of different markets, anywhere, anyone that's interested basically in doing that, and that's across the price spectrum. So that's what we're trying to do at the moment, and then there are further challenges in the future around the other parts of the circular journey.
Thank you. And you've also tried a circular subscription service as well. So what lessons did you learn from trying that?
Yes. So what's the tactful way of putting this? It was a fucking disaster. It's what it was. So it was ahead of its time, I think, would be the diplomatic way of putting it. Right. We tried to create a model. It was called circular. We put more effort into the service than the name, I promise. And we tried to create something where we actually had responsibility for the end-to-end life of the device. So we would sell it to you. You would keep it for as long as you want. We would then be able to give you an upgrade when it is time. We would take that device back. We would either guarantee it then goes on to somebody else who would pay a lower tier for it being second-hand, and when it eventually had no more life, we would take responsibility for the recycling of it. And we had a partner based in Hungary who would do the smelting and take it all down right to a component and metals level. The problem is, because we're a relatively small player, nobody really knew about it. And so it was a little bit ahead of its time because people just weren't ready to have that kind of ownership model in devices. People, particularly when they buy phones, it's a very, very personal product. It's your phone, right? It's not something that you want to rent or you want to lease or have the feeling you're doing that. So we learned a hell of a lot from it. We had thousands of subscribers instead of the millions you would need to make it a big commercial success. And in fact, I know there's another brand that I'm sure many people here will be aware of, Fairphone. They're they make the most sustainable phones on the planet. They also tried something very similar. They also wrapped it up at a very similar time that we did. I assume for the same reasons. I don't know if exactly, but we weren't able to make it a commercial success because the structures weren't quite in place yet, and the sort of the mood of people wasn't quite there, and we didn't have the big marketing budgets available to sort of explain it to people. So that was our adventure with circular. But we learned a lot, and we applied that into our sort of repairability journey, what did resonate, what didn't, and all that kind of stuff.
Thank you. Rebecca, Currys have made a great commercial success of adopting circular principles, as have Component Sense and HMD as well. How have you successfully incentivised take back, repair and resale? And what do you think others can learn from the Currys experience?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is not something that's happened overnight. It's been a really long journey for Currys in terms of how we've developed and evolved our repair centre operations and our consumer propositions around this space. But I think what has really tapped into our consumer base over the last few years in particular are some really compelling recycling propositions that we've been offering. So irrespective of whether you've bought a product at Currys or not, you can bring it back into Currys, we'll take it, we'll recycle it, and we'll give you a voucher to spend back in Currys as a result of bringing that product in. And as a result of that activity, we actually happen to be the biggest recycling agent of consumer tech across the UK. And that's everything from cables to old phones to old televisions, etc. And it's certainly brought some interesting old heritage technology back into our stores. But it drives new sales, so it's commercially great for us. It gets people into our stores, but ultimately it's doing the right thing for the customer. They can get rid of their old tech, their old cables, and it means that ultimately it's sort of driving the awareness of recycling and sort of generating, I suppose, that sort of interest in terms of how you can recycle product. Some of the other things we're doing, and it's interesting hearing you talking about your circular proposition. I think you're probably right in that it was just ahead of its time, is we can now see that when we look at leasing propositions, traditionally, like you say, people want to own their phone. And they essentially see it as being sort of something that you buy, you hold for 2.5 to 3 years, and then you go and buy a new product again. We can see that trend really changing. So actually, with the sort of younger consumers that we have, they're really familiar with subscription models. They have their Netflix subscriptions and everything else that, across all different industries. And actually, they don't necessarily want to own the tech anymore. They're quite happy to take a lease on a product, but also get guaranteed price for trade-in. And so that's something that gives them a level of commercial reassurance in terms of the price they pay, the price that they can trade it back in for, and ultimately we know that that product is coming back in at a certain point, we can refurb it, we can give it a second life, and essentially still make profit on those products as we sell it.
Thank you. And how have you built the consumer trust in buying refurbished technology as well? So closing that green gap? Because we know people are really motivated and concerned by the environment, but they don't necessarily then follow through in their purchasing decisions.
Yeah.
So how are you doing that?
I mean, it's an interesting one because we know that price still always comes first in terms of buying second-hand technology, but very close behind that is clearly quality. And for us, we've made some big commitments in terms of the quality of our products. So when they come back into our repair centre, we only use accredited parts. We work very closely with all of the big manufacturers to ensure that all of our processes are regularly audited and we follow kind of their repair processes. And that really ensures the quality of the product. We're able to offer a warranty with those repaired products or refurbished products. And as a result, we're not necessarily going to be competing with high street repair agents in terms of price always. But what they do get is that reassurance over quality of the product, which is really, really important when they are a customer of, first-time re-commerce product.
And Kenny, when you're trying to convince businesses to do something different with their excess stock, is it always the financial case, or is sustainability motivating businesses as well?
It's starting to change. I mean, it was tough. I mean, I've been doing this for nearly 25 years, and in the early days, it was all money. If you weren't providing a cash incentive, they weren't interested at all. But we are seeing younger people coming into senior positions, and they're much more in tune with the environment, and they see the benefits of it. So it's changing, but it's been slow. It's been very slow. It's been a fight, if I'm honest. Especially in the early days, people glaze over. The CFO of a multi-billion-dollar business tends to glaze over when you spend too much time talking about sustainability, and that's still the case in most environments, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I'm sure we've all got drawers at home that are full of electrical items, and our businesses are full of surplus items as well. And David, Every Child Online has successfully mobilised businesses and individuals to donate used technology, giving it a second life in schools and communities. How can we encourage more organisations to step up and get involved in schemes like yours?
We're in currently scale-up mode, but with a start-up budget, which is none. So what we're looking to do is engage with Corporate UK by taking on the ITAD industry. So where the ITAD industry invoices Corporate UK for a wiping service, we will, if you donate the money to the charity, it's a tax-efficient savings to the Corporate UK. Following that, Everyone Digital, which provide all the wiping services as an ITAD would, but Everyone Digital will trade and launch as a community interest company. So we are absolutely non-for-profit. We're tapping into people's emotions rather than the commercial reasons. So what companies are doing, absolutely from a commercial perspective, brilliant. But from our perspective, we see a trend to people want to donate their good to close the digital divide between those that have and those that haven't. So one of the things that we have started to do, probably done about 25 different schools, we'll go to tech giveaways with schools, where we'll literally invite the schools to invite those parents on the school meal schemes, and we'll pass on those laptops and refurbished ones for £25 each, rather than the cost of affording a new one from Currys. Not to say, if you've got the money, go to Currys, great company, but there's those that haven't got the budgets to buy brand new, and we're trying to close that emotional gap as well. And also make the corporates tick their ESG sustainability boxes as well, by actually showing them the statistics of where their donation is going to and the outcome and who receives it. But we've got a long way to go, and we'd welcome encouragement and conversation as to how we can potentially get involved.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Is that all right? So on these two elements together, how have you managed to convince the people in the relative top positions of these businesses that the donation or the change in the way of doing it is the way to do it, or to prevent that glaze over when it comes to a CFO? I'm quite fortunate. I work for a company that has got C-suite members who are pretty engaged in this stuff. Even then, it can be an uphill struggle sometimes. Have you got any lessons? Things that have gone really really badly? How would you advise
really
you do
well
it?
for us. So again, it's right place, right time. As an example, one of the co-founders of the charity did an apprenticeship at Ford when he was 16 in Basildon. He left at 29. Didn't want to go into senior or middle management, so he set up his own IT company, an MSP. When COVID kicked in, we went over to the local school and literally said, "We've got 25 laptops. Would these help?" The response was, "This is great. Have you got any more?" They said, "How many?" We got 800. We've quickly realised that the schools have zero budget. So the school's requirement is out there. So obviously we're just a normal, a local Essex-based MSP that gave to school. So when we tell that story to Fords then go, "Well, actually, here's some monitors, here's some kit." And they now sponsor us with transport. So again, we're enhancing their brand within the community. We've worked with global law firms as well, Kennedy's Law. They've got 20 IT professionals that will be volunteering their time to the charity as part of their volunteer days. So we work with 3 colleges that are doing T-levels in business studies or computer science, beg your pardon. So they actually look at the kit, check the kit, once it's been wiped. So it's more of a circular economy with the next generation of people that are actually going to be using the kit as well. So lots of hurdles jumped, many more to be jumped moving forward, and for that it has to be done in collaboration with all 3 of you people and Corporate UK.
I think I can just add to that from Curry's perspective. So I think it is absolutely front and centre of our boardroom in terms of having a social conscience as a company and what that means for each of our colleagues that kind of work in our business. So they feel rightly very proud of, £1 donated on from every sale that we make in terms of circular products go to Digital Poverty Alliance, how product that doesn't have a kind of a re-commerce opportunity is given to local government, to schools, housing associations, etc., to support that digital poverty gap. And actually, we were talking a little bit before the session about what it means for colleagues in terms of being part of the process of giving tech longer life and being part of that circular economy. And we have really, really low attrition in our repair centre in Newark, which, we hire thousands of people in that space, and they love being part of the solution. They really enjoy that kind of continuous improvement aspect of looking at how we continually make the process of refurbing products quicker, smoother, more efficient, and essentially giving more tech longer life for our customers.
Thank you.
We do have some examples of companies that are a bit more forward-thinking. There's a company, large EV company we're talking to at the moment, and they don't manufacture the electronics themselves. They subcontract it out, which is very common in the electronics. It usually goes out to an EMS, an electronic manufacturing services company. And they're talking about insisting that a percentage of their product is using what we would call green chips that are already made, rather than triggering a new manufacture, actually insisting that their suppliers use some proportion, and they were talking maybe 20%. Quite similar to glass. I mean, we're all used to recycling glass. We take the bottles to the bottle bank, and 54% of new glass is recycled glass, and that's been the case for a long time, and is constantly rising. So I mean, that would be a fantastic trend, and we're working on a tool just now that's in beta that would allow smaller companies to effectively give us their bill of materials, their shopping list, and we would monitor the market, and when excess becomes available, we can offer it out in an effortless fashion. So that's one of the ways that we're trying to find more outlets for the stock.
That makes sense. So what we're saying, I guess, essentially is a bit of living the values, genuinely right the way up at that senior level, and then a bit of making sure right place, right time, demonstrating the commercial value and how they can take it on. And I think it's fascinating. And in every industry, you get one or maybe two players that have that, the ethos that clearly, Currys has at the very top, that are really genuinely not just paying lip service to those kind of things, but that are actually doing it. Everyone in the audience can probably, regardless of what industry you're in, you can probably think of the example of the company who genuinely does it, right? You could probably think of one in fashion. You can think of one in, whatever it is you're here for. So it's really interesting to see how that plays out, and how they get influenced and how they influence in turn. But yeah, sorry for hijacking the running order.
Can I just add to that as well? I think in basic commercial terms, what Currys are doing is when they're giving you the product, they're giving you the warranty and the insurance that backs up your peace of mind. From our perspective as a charity, when we're repurposing it, at present we're not able to offer any warranty or anything like that. So we're working towards trying to find a solution, but the solution will always be a second-hand product would always break, it will always go wrong, it will always fail at some component point, and that's where we're looking to then break it all down into a Meccano Lego set kind of mindset, where we can get kids off of their computers and actually engage in their creative mindset by actually engaging with something that's not blue screen. And I think that's important just for mental health, and also in time also e-waste factor as well.
And Adam, what sort of policies would you like to see government adopt in the UK to really drive circular business practices?
God, that's a broad question, isn't it? I think maybe if we start with what we've seen in recent years, we are at, I guess, what you'd call the tail end of the most recent set of things being implemented. The eco-design is being the biggest thing in my industry, certainly, and as part of the drive to basically get people, when they're manufacturing things, to consider certain things much more earlier on in the process. So I think generally, in principle, it's good, and it's the fact that the European Union is ahead of the curve and that kind of stuff is fantastic, and it's something we can all take pride in. A lot of where the focus has been up until this point has been in what you'd call the first half of the circle, I guess. I see a lot less regulation now and in the pipeline about the actual e-waste bit of it at the end. Take phones, for example, there are still between 1.1 and 1.4 billion phones sold every year, depending on the strength of the market in any particular year. So, regardless if you can make that last for however many years, what's going to happen to all of those devices when they come out of the other end? And that's where the legislation isn't currently targeted. It's based on the goodwill and the desire of brands like Currys and HMD and various other people to try and design for that and bring up those services and make it happen. What we've seen is a massive resurgence of surgence of second-hand devices, right? And that's because it has become commercially viable and very lucrative to actually have that second-hand market, and it's a way people are using it basically as a way of getting access to more expensive devices for price points they were never able to. It isn't, unfortunately, being done for sustainability reasons from a consumer standpoint. There's a lot of businesses that are trying to drive it that way. So what the legislation, I think, in the future needs to do is to consider joining up the circle at the very end. We've done excellent work on the first part, repairability and longer life batteries and all of this kind of stuff, minimum amounts of recycled materials, this kind of thing. But then, how do we then join up the circle? Because at the minute, there are very, very few, if any, truly circular products out there, because we haven't quite solved that yet. So I would love a focus on that part of the journey for the future.
Thank you. And Rebecca, what would help Currys? So what could policymakers do that would accelerate the growth of your circular proposition?
I think what I'd actually like to see is just more of a levelling up in general across the UK. And when I look at, I think your point about e-regulation is really valid, because when I look at our business that we have in across the Nordic region, they're very much driven by the European regulation around the circular economy. And I think what that means is that you do have that level playing field in terms of the responsibility that's put on retailers and manufacturers to handle the product that they're pushing out into the market and find a mechanism for managing it at the other end of the process. So I think that would be my real push, really, is to see more regulation around that to create a level playing field in the UK.
Thank you. Kenny?
Yeah, for me, the regulation's often behind. So some of the things that you've been talking about are ahead of the regulation, and that's the way we really need to be thinking. The companies that aren't doing things properly are going to still do the least they possibly can, unfortunately. So I think the consumer has a lot of power. We're all consumers too, so we can choose companies that are doing the right thing, and I think it's really important that we do. I think that will make companies more likely to adopt changes and to adopt best practice than actual regulation.
I mean, the one thing I'd layer onto that is that whilst I agree that the consumer has power, absolutely, unquestionably, unfortunately, when it comes to my industry, it's simply way down the purchasing hierarchy and consideration. So what can be done in order to actually make people want to drive it up more? How do you wrap the propositions around things like, instead of just sustainability and doing the right thing, how can you demonstrate that it's better for someone's pocket to keep the device longer, or the fact that it's more durable and it's going to last you longer, all of these kind of things. Because when you mentioned the green gap earlier on, the world could be on fire. I mean, let's face it, in some places it literally is, right? And people still wouldn't buy purely based on sustainability and buying the greener choice. It would always be around, in my industry, it's the battery and the chipset and the camera and that kind of stuff. So how do we wrap it up? And that's what we've been trying to get our heads around. How can you present it in a way where you're not charging more for it and you're demonstrating a clear value for having made the sustainable choice? We haven't solved it yet. Be fascinated to hear in the Q&A section afterwards if anyone else has got good ideas out there on how they've solved it and what you guys think. But that, I think, is one of the major challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. I think some of the things that you're talking about, Rebecca, are definitely a great step in the right direction, and it's not happening across the board. I spent some time in Ghana last year investigating the e-waste problem out there, and it's very much British and European goods that are ending up in their waste site. It's one of the largest e-dumps in the world, and it's quite shocking. And we saw evidence of our goods ending up there and getting literally burnt. They're just trying to get to some value, and the value for them is just copper. They're not sophisticated enough to get any other elements out of it, so they're burning the hell out of all sorts of stuff. There's about 140,000 people living in the slum area where they're doing the burning, and it's really shocking. The conditions these people are living in, the environment around about them is hellish. The children are in amongst it. And recycling, even done properly, isn't that clean yet. And I would love to see, if the government's going to get involved, I would love to see some money going to creating greener, cleaner solutions for recycling. Because recycling, at the end of the day, is still problematic.
So what sort of thing would you like to see from the government there to help with fairer, safer recycling internationally? You think that's something that perhaps the UK should look at intervening in other markets, or is it about changing what we send to those countries in the first place?
Well, technically, we're not supposed to be sending e-waste out of country anyway. So how is it getting there? That's what I want to understand. That's what I'm putting some time and effort into now, is understanding how it gets there. So I saw containers coming in, saw them coming from Amsterdam, I saw them coming from the UK, I saw them being emptied, and the claim is that 80% of the goods going there are working. So they're going under the guise of working goods, but there was evidence that if you know somebody in the port, you can get anything you like in, pretty much. So somehow it's getting out of our system, and I don't currently know why, and I really would like to understand how that is happening. So yeah, since 2000 we shouldn't be sending it abroad anyway.
And David, what do you think policy could do to support schemes like yours as well, to encourage more businesses to pass on their items at end of life for reuse?
I think it's having an additional voice. So if I think about what the charity's done, I would also add that I think there's probably 1,000 other companies and charities in the UK that have done exactly what we've done. I think where we've been different is because of my background within the venue market and the events market, I've been able to come to the larger events. I've been able to get into a voice like Excel. Excel has then got the voice to engage with the global exhibition companies that has already enhanced our donations into it. So the next step for us as a challenge is the government's not going to listen to me, but it will listen to Excel because of the impact it has just across Newham. Again, if we can make the change in Newham, then we can make the change bigger. But it's again that part of that collaboration piece.
Great, thank you. So I'd like to open up for questions from the floor for our expert panel. Would anyone like to ask anything on what you've heard, or anything that we haven't heard about yet? Sorry, my glasses are for reading, so I'm going to have to take them off to see you all properly. We've got a lady at the front.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Oh, yeah. Thanks very much for a great panel discussion. It was really interesting. I would like to go back to the point about, I think we can't separate commerciality and emotion in sustainability. I think it's really important. So how can you marry up the two? Because in my opinion, at least, longevity, especially in the sustainability landscape, requires both a commercial mindset and also tapping into people's emotions. So how across your various businesses can we do that to make it successful?
Yeah, would anyone like to go first?
I'm happy to go first if it's helpful. So I think you're absolutely right. So look, businesses need to be able to make money, and that's why it's important that now you're starting to see the sort of the culmination and coming together of a sort of increasing sustainability agenda and it being higher in people's list of priorities, but it's being supported by the fact that people can make money out of it as well, and that's great for businesses, because those two things coming together is starting to drive the volume and just kind of the awareness across industry. I think one of the things that we do is really just try to drive awareness of things like the digital poverty gap, how we support charities. And I think a lot of the work that we're doing to underpin through donations from sales, etc., is where people really start to get behind it in our kind of corporate world. So they can see that what they're doing in their day-to-day job in terms of repairing, refurbishing tech, selling that, donating to charity, it's essentially underpinning a sort of a much bigger cause. And so I think that's where the kind of the emotion and people feeling very connected to that, as well as kind of driving the commercial benefit.
So to add to that, and a great question, totally agree with you. I think from a charity's perspective, businesses have to make money. Businesses also need to save money. So the ITAD industry has been the only solution for repurposing. We're coming to the table with an alternative option. So tax-free donation is saving corporate UK whatever their ITAD bill is. And as we grow and progress, we'll be able to provide additional ESG sustainability measurements that the traditional ITAD industry has not done. But it's about collaborations. How do we do it together? And I don't think at the moment there is a one-stop, and I don't think there will be a one box ticks everything. It's just everyone together. And again, open to conversation. Come talk to us. We're on stand F600.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, working together is clearly what it's all about. And it's interesting learning from one another as well. I mean, even today I've learned quite a lot about some of the things that can be done, with the phones and similarly in retail. So yeah, it's really good to talk. It's good to be open and honest, and I don't think there's enough of that. I think we need to be much clearer about what we're doing, why we're doing it, and we're certainly feeling people are buying into who we are and why we do what we do, rather than the actual mechanics of the business itself. And that's good. It's heading in the right direction.
I mean, the team have all said it fantastically well, right? The only thing that I'll maybe layer in is my experience in the global role that I have. So I operate, my teams work across all the different global markets that we sell in, and you do see a major difference depending where you are in the world on the attitude to this. Europe versus America is a great example, right? So here in Europe, there's almost a little bit of shame in making money when it comes to good causes, right? There's almost a little bit of an idea of you're either doing the right thing or you're going to be making money and make it profitable. And it's total nonsense, right? Whereas the Americans are much, much more direct about it. It's like, yeah, of course, you're going to make money and you're going to do the right thing. And so everything that everyone has just said is absolutely where we need to get to. But in Europe, it has been a little bit more, you're making money out of it, are you? Oh, wow, okay. So we do need to get to a place where it's a little bit more, it's understandable that something needs to be scalable and it needs to be profitable. It's exactly why our circular proposition didn't do as well as it could have done, right? Because, unfortunately, we couldn't scale it up. It was okay from a profitability standpoint, but we couldn't get it to more people, and therefore it became too resource intensive. So there needs to be a general acceptance that it is not only is it absolutely fine, it is crucial to drive change to make something scalable and profitable. Because without that, what is there? Yeah.
Thank you.
Right, gentleman towards the back.
Thanks for the panel. Just a couple of questions. Maybe what would you like to see governments do to maybe change, electronics market, and then, regulations, for example. Can you standardize products and make their circularity much longer? What can be done basically to break the mold of just use and then pump and dump, really, and then upcycle? And how can you change the kind of economics of just replacing an iPhone with 13 to an iPhone 15?
Who'd like to go on product design?
It's very difficult. I mean, commercial businesses, shareholder-owned businesses, it's all about the money. Even on the chip side, we're trying to engage with the chip makers themselves. They would rather you dump it and make more. So that's how they make money. So it's really tricky, really, really difficult getting that balance right. And even legislation, I'm not sure how they can resolve that. But yeah, it's a mess. It's really challenging.
The only other thing I would add to that is just when you look at it on the flip side, is also making sure that the government almost incentivise the right behaviour in this respect. They're not penalising industry for doing the right thing. We certainly have had conversations over the last few years around wanting to grow our sustainable activities, but having to not be able to charge for it, as an example. And those things drive the wrong behaviour in industry. And I think the government need to work hand in glove with industry to make sure that they're incentivising them, or at least they're sort of putting, I guess, a structure in place that, from a legislation perspective, that enables them to still run a commercial business of sustainable services.
I mean, Adam mentioned chipsets earlier, and you need a license to use them. So you've bought the device, but you still need a license to use them, and that's a restrictive practice to make it harder for you to redistribute that stock. And that's becoming more and more common. So we are having conversations with them. I was at a sort of round table with the electronic manufacturing industry in Munich last year, and when they were asked about their sustainable goals and targets, the best they could come up with, and this was some of the top brands, was that their products help other people be more sustainable. So they've got a long way to go, unfortunately.
Well, do you want to go first? Because I've got maybe a several minute long answer to this particular question. So you go.
As a charity ambassador, and definitely not from a commercial, I believe there is legislation coming in that corporate UK is going to start getting fined if they are not seen to be sustainably getting rid of their waste. How that's measured, how that's tracked, that's the missing part of the jigsaw puzzle, I believe, at the moment, that we're all here trying to help to get to.
Well, okay, so let me maybe break down the question and try and answer it as someone who is, within the manufacturing industry and also has a lot of, kind of interest in this kind of stuff. So what's gone well with the existing legislation? There are demonstrable and clear examples where change has been driven from, what the EU has done. One of the biggest examples is the adopting of universal USB-C charging. Okay, right? That only happened, and there's a certain brand that has adopted that particular charging practice because they were made to. And that has driven change, and it's going to standardise things. It's going to minimise the number of charges that's going to be made. It's going to have an impact on e-waste. That is a tick. An example of where it maybe hasn't gone as well as it could have done is around the battery replacement. Okay, so currently there's legislation that landed in July that's enforceable from this year, where the devices that you're going to be getting need to have the battery replaceable, user replaceable, so that they can actually then extend the life of it, because that's what all of that particular legislation was about. Great, fantastic in principle. There is a loophole built in, which means that if you can make the battery itself last a certain number of charges, I think it's 800 from the top of my head, and demonstrate that it doesn't degrade below a certain level of efficiency after a certain period of time, then you don't actually need to make it replaceable. It's considered good enough. Why on earth that was built into the legislation, where the entire thing was designed to make it more accessible to last, even if you do both, great, make it last that number, but also then make it replaceable. So there are plenty of examples of things that have gone well and things that can be done better in future iterations. One of the classic ones that's often cited in things like this is what the impact of the second-hand market was when they did things with certain elements of standardisation here. They would have, if it hadn't been fed back, almost overnight when this came into a force, have prevented the sale of a lot of devices more than about 2 or 3 years old from sale in Europe, because there were certain things like charging ports and certain regulation elements that meant you couldn't sell them from that point. Various exemptions are then done. So there needs to be a bit more dialogue up front between the government and the big forces at play, that are going to be the ones that eventually at the 11th hour push back on it and get exemptions and get things prevented. Do that earlier on so that you can make it the most effective piece it can be. Then if we can flip to the second part of the question, which is for the future, it actually comes back to what the team was saying, in the sense that it's what happens at the end of the journey now. All the focus thus far has been on what I would consider the first sort of 3/4 of the circularity journey, making sure that things are designed to last longer, making sure that people are then giving it a second life, although that's mainly happening because it's a commercially driven thing. But then it's what's actually happening to make sure that a device is taken back, giving some kind of responsibility for the people who are selling or manufacturing or something, in order to ensure that something then happens to that device, that it doesn't end up in one of the drawers. I think you were talking about, Rebecca, all of these things that we have with loads of tech in the back of our drawers. That's a big challenging bit, and no one has really attempted to address that from a legislative point of view yet, as far as I'm aware, and it's going to be the hardest nut to crack. And when it is done, that will then be an attempt at true circularity. And it's going to be very hard, right? But that's the thing I think that needs to happen next. So.
Yeah, there was a company in Scotland that I was talking to several years ago that could basically recycle electronics. So they could take a circuit board, they could crush it into powder, and they could reclaim the gold and the copper particularly in a completely clean way, and the only waste was water. Sounded perfect, but they literally could not get funding to develop it into a commercial product. And you know, if any regulation or legislation was around, if it could help fund some of those things, you know, like a moonshot prize for electronics, because it's a massive problem. I mean, it's not going away. You know, if we could find some way to fund a project like that, we will find a solution. There will be a better solution, but it does take money, and it's not commercially viable in the short term. It will be in the long run. That might be 10, 20 years away.
And what do you think that money is needed for? Is it for more like research to understand the problem, or is it for investment in the infrastructure?
Yeah, as I said, I don't think it'll be commercially viable in the short term. So, you know, they'd literally be a loss-making company. So, if they would need funded for a long period of time to develop the technology to be able to scale it. A bit like what you were talking about. You're in the same boat. You're trying to scale something fast. You're doing it all for the right reasons. But how do you monetize that? How do you make money? And again, you were talking, Adam, about profit. Profit's not a dirty word. You've got to make money to do anything in life. And if we could tackle some of these real issues instead of boasting about how big our rockets are, you know, some of the richest people on the planet are playing a silly game comparing rocket sizes. And that cash could certainly be used for good.
It's also good to benchmark globally as well, actually, because there are certain places that you might necessarily expect that are doing very, very well at the e-waste bit. Sometimes it's places where it ends up. But so places like Vietnam, Indonesia, they're actually on the forefront of a lot of this technology that does, you know, similar things to what you're talking about and is able to do that more joined up bit. So we're very good and we're ahead of the game at the upfront bit and trying to, you know, get manufacturers and things to behave in a certain way. And then there are other parts of the world that we can learn from about the connecting things up, I think.
Yeah, we've got another question in the centre over here.
Hi there. Thanks again to the panel for a really interesting conversation. I was just wondering your views on this. Last month there was a really good case study coming out of France where Vinted, a second-hand clothing platform, was the biggest fashion seller in the country, which is really exciting as a circular success case study. So just wondering your thoughts on why not with electronics, or what would need to be true for that to be the case with the electronic market in the UK?
I'm happy to start with that. So Vinted's a really interesting case because if you look back to some of the reasons why people didn't used to buy secondhand fashion, it was because of hygiene factors, etc. And actually a lot of that applies to tech. So people don't want to buy secondhand phones because they've typically in the past seen it as a sort of a personal product. They want to know that, and earbuds and all of those things, they want to know they've been properly cleaned and kind of repurposed. And I think just generally through driving awareness of the process that these products go through, and also just the sustainability agenda being on the rise, people's social conscience, I think those two things being married together, if we can deliver those products as Vinted are able to through their platform at the right kind of in the right commercial model, then, you know, I think that people are kind of thinking, why not?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I mean, Vinted, I'm a proud user of Vinted myself. I buy clothes from Vinted. It's a fairly recent thing for me, maybe a year or so. Again, in Ghana, I saw so much clothing waste. That's another story completely. You know, even they don't want our cheap crap. You know, so all the stuff that goes into the clothing bank ends up there, and they only want a small percentage of it. The rest of it, again, gets landfilled. So that's another conversation. But electronics, similar. You know, my daughter's bought a keyboard. She wanted this crazy, very expensive keyboard, and she didn't have enough money to buy it new. She bought it second hand on Gumtree, I think, and it was disgusting. It was filthy, and yeah, she'd spent a lot of time cleaning it, and she did a great job, and she was very proud of it. But that would put me off, I've got to be honest. So yeah, I think we spoke before about grading. How do you grade things? Everybody claims to have things that are A-graded, and there's a lot of variation
And that's why I think it's so important that people understand the process that these products go through in terms of not just the repairing and refurbing, but the hygiene and cleaning process that the products go through as well.
And I think to add to that as well is a jumper or a shirt doesn't need to be fixed. It can be passed on and passed on and passed on multiple times. Once you get to electronic things, you're passing it on, but it will break, it will crack, it will need a service. Jumper doesn't need a service. It's stuck in the wash, it's recycled again. I think that's another challenge why it's not happening as fast as what we would like it to do.
Okay, so one of the various teams that I look after is the insights function as well. So I'll maybe come at it from a global trends thing, and then how that, what it matters for electronics as well. The big change when it came to the fashion industry was when culturally it actually became a bad thing to have fast fashion. And it was partly the work of companies like Vinted and various other things, and the way that these products are made and all that kind of thing. That is what shifted the conversation around always having the latest fashion or the latest thing, and it just permeated culture and massively drove a change in the way that people behaved, and the technology and the services rose to meet that, and it was all just sort of this beautiful synergistic, everything happening at the same time. You then, and France, by the way, there's a very good reason why that article came out in France rather than anywhere else. They are ahead of the game when it comes to all of this kind of stuff. And you look at electronics repairability as well. They've got their own repairability index. So France, chef's kiss, doing very, very well. But when it comes to the actual electronics side of things, that cultural shift hasn't happened yet. It is still, in fact, it's going the other way because of what's happening with trading. And that's because that's where the money is all of a sudden. So businesses have realized that you can actually get the devices back and then get someone to come and upgrade because they're getting a fair amount of commercial value back for that device that they're trading in, and then they're hooked in for a longer period of time again. And it's actually incentivizing a faster upgrade cycle, and things are happening much more rapidly, which is not good from an e-waste standpoint. It's good for consumer value, and that's why it's winning at the minute. You go into America and places in Europe at the moment, and you see up to £500 or £600 of value being returned to a consumer for trading in last year's model to upgrade to the next one. Great from a consumer standpoint, absolute disaster from an e-waste standpoint, right? But that's where that model has developed recently. So that cultural shift hasn't happened in tech in the same way that it has around the fast fashion concept. And then to the second part of the question, which is how do we do that? How do we evolve the conversation around tech? Sorry, don't know yet. We're working on it. We're trying to work out how you do that. But there's still a fair way to go.
Okay, I think we've run out of time now. So if you could join me in thanking the panel with a round of applause. Thank you so much for your great insights, and I hope you continue to enjoy your day at Reset Connect.